The sun hung over the meadow. Peppa, George, and Evie were playing hide-and-seek near the old radio tower behind the school. Peppa hid behind a metal box. Evie laughed as she counted to 10. When Evie opened her eyes, George was standing nearby, silent. His face looked strangely still. He pointed toward the antenna. A red light blinked on it. Peppa stepped out from behind the box. "That's the tower from the game 99 Nights," she said in surprise. The light blinked again, 3 times. Then the speaker hissed. From the loudspeaker came a distorted voice. "Night 1. 98 remain." The children exchanged glances. Evie came closer, pressed a button on the panel, and the whole area lit up with red light. The old swings began to creak on their own. The sun suddenly seemed to go out. The sky turned gray. Evie screamed, "Peppa! There's someone standing by the road." Beyond the fence stood a tall figure, stretched, as if pulled out of shadow. Peppa grabbed George and ran toward the forest. Evie turned. The figure was closer now. She ran after them. The forest grew darker. The trees looked the same, repeating endlessly. From far away came the same voice. "Night 1 is not over." "You weren't supposed to leave," the children burst into an old barn. Inside, rusted equipment and a screen with a timer. 005721. Peppa switched on the monitor. A video appeared, the 3 of them at the radio tower. But in the frame beside them stood a 4th figure. Its face was hidden, only a long arm reaching out to touch Evie's shoulder. The screen flashed. For a split second, Peppa saw herself, but with black eyes and a smile that stretched from ear to ear. The barn began to shake. Smoke seeped through the cracks. Evie pulled George toward the door, but it slammed shut. The voice hissed through the speaker. "Night 1, not survived." The windows fogged from the inside. On the glass, handprints appeared, too many to belong to just 3 children. The light flickered, and for an instant, the same stretched figure appeared behind them. Closer now. Peppa slammed her hand on the timer. The numbers began to drop rapidly. 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 2 seconds. The sound grew louder. When the timer reached 0, everything went black. A second of silence. Then, a loud crack. The screen flickered to life again. Peppa, George, and Evie were standing by the tower once more. But this time, new text was flashing beside them. Night 2, 97 remain. The family enters a vast Victorian greenhouse. Dozens of pots with exotic plants surround them. In the center rises a wooden sculpture of Labubu holding a flower. A close-up of the wooden Labubu's face. In its bead-like eyes, the shadows of shifting plants are reflected. On the petals of a rare orchid, patterns emerge, resembling grinning Labubu faces. In the heart of the flower, among the stamens, tiny seeds glitter, shaped like miniature Labubus. The leaves on the walls form silhouettes that resemble the family members, but with disproportionately large heads. Drops of condensation slide down the glass ceiling. They merge into patterns that form smiles. The family steps into a closed pavilion. The air is sweet and heavy with the scent of orchids. At the center stands a vase filled with transparent nectar. Inside float tiny labubus, as if made from candied fruit. All the walls are covered with orchids, their petals resembling Labubu's enormous ears. On a gleaming drop of nectar appears the inverted reflection of the family, and each face bears Labubu's features. The roots of the plants intertwine, weaving a web. Faces take shape within its cells. Sprouts begin to push through the floor. They grow rapidly, transforming into stems with lantern-shaped flowers in the form of Labubu. The pavilion door becomes overgrown with ivy. Its heart-shaped leaves fold into the shapes of eyes. The family finds themselves before an ancient tree. In its trunk gapes a hollow shaped like Labubu's wide smile. Inside the hollow lies a nest of intertwined roots. Within it sits a massive Labubu made of living flowers. Petals fall from the branches, forming portraits of the family on the ground, only with plant-like features. The floral Labubu gazes straight into the camera. In each of her flower eyes is a tiny reflection of the family members. The tree's branches bend, forming an arch that leads into the hollow. Roots rise from the earth, gently wrapping around the family's legs, covering them with blooming patterns. The family transforms into living topiary sculptures in the shape of Labubu. Their faces become perfect floral compositions. The great flower Labubu nods slightly, and the garden freezes in eternal balance. Peppa and her classmates were on their way to a field trip in the city park. The road was empty. The sun was setting. Mist was rising from the fields. The children peered out the windows. Out of the fog appeared a figure in a long coat. The face was indistinguishable. The children stepped out of the bus. The wind stirred the trees. Silence pressed against their ears. The footpath led into a dense forest. Leaves rustled under their feet. The shadows of the trees shaped themselves into human silhouettes, moving on their own. In a clearing stood an old pavilion with broken windows. Inside, fleeting figures of children appeared, children who had never been there before. Tentacles of moss and water clutched at Peppa's shoes. The shadows mimicked her movements, their faces distorted. The children recoiled, but the bridge began to shake and sway. Roots rose from the ground like tentacles, wrapping around Peppa's and her friends' legs. The shadows surrounded them, blocking the way back. From the center of the darkness emerged a massive figure with a dozen red eyes. It bent down toward Peppa. Tentacles coiled around her shoulders and legs. The children stood frozen. Peppa, Zoe, and Candy stayed overnight at school. Flashlights stood on the desks. The children laughed, playing hide and seek. The lights began to flicker. Chalk writings distorted, letters twisted, crawling by themselves across the board. The laughter faded. Strange voices softly whispered their names. Red eyes flickered on the walls, watching every movement. Peppa felt an icy chill, her heart racing. Suddenly, a silhouette darted behind her. Red eyes stared straight at her. Peppa, Zoe, and Candy rushed into the hallway. The doors slammed shut on their own. The lamps flickered. Shadows from the ceiling and walls slid down, stretching into tentacles. They moved toward the children, intertwining and writhing. The children ran, the echo of their footsteps blending with a faint metallic hum. A silhouette flashed ahead, its eyes glowing red. For a moment it seemed they had managed to escape it. The children hid behind the tables. The dishes trembled, the space itself seemed to breathe. For a brief moment they calmed down. Peppa and George decided to play in the forest with their toys. While they were playing, they didn't notice how far they had wandered into the woods. As the game went on, Peppa and George lost track of time, and dusk began to fall. Suddenly, Peppa noticed some movement nearby, but when she turned her head, no one was there. Peppa took George by the hand, and they started looking for a way out of the forest. George heard rustling behind them and told Peppa, She told him to stay where he was and went to check what it was. The bushes kept rustling. Peppa slowly approached and pushed them aside. To her relief, it was just a rabbit that quickly hopped away. Peppa turned to go back, but then she heard George scream. She ran toward the sound and saw a deer holding George and running off into its den. Peppa was terrified, but she was determined to save her brother. The deer was too fast and Peppa couldn't catch up. She began to cry, but then she noticed the deer's footprints leading deeper into the forest. She still had a chance to save George. As she followed the tracks, it began to rain. Peppa realized that if she didn't hurry, the rain would wash the tracks away and she'd lose her only lead. She started running. After about 5 minutes, Peppa reached a cave. She didn't even know there was a cave in this forest. Gathering her courage, she stepped inside. It was dark and she had to feel her way along the walls. Soon she saw a faint light ahead and slowly moved toward it. As she came closer, Peppa saw George trapped in a cage. When she turned her head, she noticed Susie and Pedro locked in cages on the other side. She had to save them all. Suddenly, she heard footsteps coming toward her. Peppa quickly hid inside an open cage, hoping the deer would pass by. But then the door slammed shut, and the deer began to laugh. Peppa realized it had all been a trap. She didn't know what to do and started to cry. The deer left, probably to hunt for more victims. Suddenly, Peppa heard more footsteps approaching. In fear, she squeezed her eyes shut. Then she heard a familiar voice. It was Daddy Pig. He had gone to look for Peppa and George after finding their toys near the cave. Daddy Pig opened the cages and told them to follow him. When they reached the exit, Daddy Pig realized something was wrong. The cave entrance was sealed with large stones. He tried to move them, but they were too heavy. Peppa then heard laughter from the other side of the rocks, followed by slow, retreating footsteps.